We're gonna continue with the discussion and the panel on the foundational values that influence the future of architecture in Europe, with Statis Kalyvas, who is going to be the moderator of this session. Statis is a Gladstone professor at All Souls of Department at All Souls College in University of Oxford. Statis is also chair of board of Stavros Niarchos Cultural Center here in Athens. So we are very glad that Stavros is going to join us. So welcome, and we're looking forward to.
Well, thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. So that's the time for a second panel. I'm not going to say much. I'm just going to introduce the topic of the panel and the speakers. And the idea is for the speakers to say what they have to say and then save as much time as we can in order to have a conversation, a discussion afterwards. The topic is future heritage, which is the topic of the conference in general. And one of the big contradictions about the term future and heritage is that heritage is necessarily something that comes from the past. So the question is, how can we transpose the past into the present by thinking into the future? Heritage is a term that is a bit like other words that have this internal tension built in, like, for example, authenticity. If you try to be authentic, you are not. So it's very much one of the questions that I will have for the speakers is, how can you think about the future of heritage now, given that if you think about what you do as heritage is no longer heritage? And very much a lot of the things that we heard in the previous panels are about things that the people who created the structures and the spaces that we consider today heritage didn't do it from that perspective. The things that the people who are restoring them and bringing back to life and reshaping them are also things that are modern interpretations and very personal interpretations of these spaces and objects. And therefore, this is the tension that I think is worth discussing. So the first speaker today is going to be Sergei Bazaryia, who is the program manager of the European Heritage Days, which is a joint action by the Council of Europe and the European Union, operating since 1999, and described as the most widely celebrated participatory cultural event in Europe, engaging millions under the motto, Europe, a common heritage. That's also a very political kind of description, and I'm very much looking to hear what Sergei has to say. So welcome, and the floor is yours. And let's try to keep our 10 minutes.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much for the honor of the invitation. Let me begin with this simple observation. The European Heritage Days are not only about the past. They are about values which heritage communities across Europe enact every year through thousands of events. Sustainability, care, openness, transnational cooperation, intergenerational responsibility are not abstract principles. They are lived practices. And they provide us with a lens to think about the future of architecture or heritage in general. Just a few words about European Heritage Days. It started in 1985, so last year we celebrated 50th anniversary. It started in France. It became a joint program with the European Union and Council of Europe in 1999. And every year, we count thousands of events. The statistics for 2025 are not yet available. We count around 60,000 events across 48 countries who takes part in this events organization across Europe. And we count around 20 million people attending these events every year. We also organize these events around annual themes, and last year the theme was architectural heritage. We counted around 39 countries out of 48 member states taking part in this theme. Heritage Days is far more than celebrations. Heritage Days are practical ways to address challenges, such as the end of accessibility, need for accessibility, climate change, limited resources, loss of skills, social division, turning the values of the Council of Europe conventions into concrete actions. Also, Heritage Days could bring knowledge and insights to architects and planners at the crucial stage of developing their briefs and programs and concepts. Each year, a shared theme prompts us to see Europe's built environment as a living resource for both present needs and future designs. Last year coincided with a number of anniversaries. It was 50 years since the adoption of the European Charter of the Architectural Heritage in 1975 during the European Year of Architecture, a pivotal moment whose visual identity inspired the European Heritage Days logo we use today. We also mark 40 years since the Convention for the Protection of the Architectural Heritage of Europe, Granada Convention of 1985. We celebrated the Council of Europe Framework Convention on the Value of Cultural Heritage for Society, the so-called FARA Convention, which was designed in 2005. The European Landscape Convention in 2000 safeguarded the link between cultural and natural heritage. These anniversaries remind us that heritage is not static. Each decade redefined how we relate to the spaces we live, work, and gather in. Our commemoration was not a retrospective last year. It was an active engagement with the values that shape our identity and future. The definition of heritage has expanded significantly across each Council of Europe instrument from 1975 to today. The FARA Convention of 2005 recognizes both tangible and intangible heritage and emphasizes the role of active community involvement in defining what is valuable. This marks a major shift from the 1975 Architectural Charter, which centered heritage on the historical, artistic, and architectural value of monuments and sites. It was different with the 1995 Granada Convention, which advanced legal protection for architectural heritage as the theoretical remains of cultural value. By 2000, the European Landscape Convention further broadened the field, viewing landscape itself as heritage, embracing both everyday and exceptional spaces, shaped by interaction of people and the nature. Each decade has thus shifted the definition of heritage from the preservation of physical monuments to legal recognition of built environments, to an inclusive view of landscape and the communities that give them meaning. Looking forward, heritage is increasingly seen not as a static inheritance, but as an evolving participatory process. Living resources for sustainability, care, inclusion, and innovation, adaptable to future needs and values. I echo Thibaut's presentation, who mentioned yesterday that heritage is a process, and also presentation of today about Cyprus Museum when it was the verb heritaging. Indeed, heritage is a process. Few challenges we're trying to address for European Heritage Days, and I will give just a couple examples. The presentation itself will provide much more examples. I believe, will be able to receive it from the organizers. But accessibility is foundational to the work of the European Heritage Days. Accessibility, we understand widely. It's not only accessibility for people with special needs, but in general, heritage is a democratic concept. It should be accessible to all parts of the communities. We are trying to to fight the idea that heritage is something exclusive. Also, Heritage Days itself is not a festival of nostalgia, but an engine for practical knowledge. We really try to cover the intangible part of the heritage as very endemic to the Heritage Days organization. It's very pertinent to the architecture as well, because certain skills, yesterday we talked about stone works, for example, and how skills from islands of Greece were transferred to Portugal. This is something which Heritage Days tackle every year, skill transfer, but also skill transfer not only across borders, but across generations, from older masters to younger apprentices. This is what we do. We also try to spotlight the adaptive reuse of heritage places. Just a few examples from very recent grantees of the European Heritage Days and events organizers. The Abbey of Stavelot in Belgium redesigned circulation of tours and mediation of their heritage with ramps and lifts and multisensory and tactile exhibitions and child height displays to increase accessibility in their premises. In Tallinn, Estonia, Open House mobilizes nearly 200 volunteers to open normally closed buildings with inclusive multilingual tours, including Estonian Sign Language, creating a citywide platform for learning and dialogue. In Finland, the Alvar Aalto cultural route, or the Council of Europe, organizes guided tours and special events that connect buildings, both privately owned and public buildings, with Aalto architectural philosophy. I would like to cite the example of Greek European Heritage Days organized by the Ministry of Culture and Ephorate of Antiquities, and we have National Coordinator of the European Heritage Days for Greece with us today, Lenis Guleta. I really kudos to what they do in relation to sustainability, showing how ancient practices, natural materials are used in today's architecture, especially in Cycladic islands and in general across Greece. Yeah, I would like to mention also the skill transfer again. We all talked today about Charterhouse Monastery in Slovenia. I would like to mention Charterhouse example from Mauerbach in Austria, where heritage authorities of Austria organize workshops to learn skills how to restore buildings. And they basically restore this monastery and teach younger generations how to do it. And they organize heritage days to attract attention to these events. I would like to mention also example of Ukraine. In Lviv, Kiev, Odessa last year, the focus was on accessibility for quite obvious reasons. There is increased number of people with special needs because of war of aggression. And also Ukraine for the last few years increased the number of events organized for displaced people, internally displaced people, by hosting communities to present them to the heritage of the communities where they are hosted. Looking ahead, our annual theme for this year is Heritage at Risk, very pertinent to the topic of this conference. And our annual theme calls attention to the various environmental, social, and technological threats to tangible and intangible heritage. We also organize annual theme in 2027, linking with Heritage at Risk. The theme would be Hidden Heritage, which would encourage us to reveal the obscure sites not usually open to public, overlooked details, difficult or dark stories, dissonant past, and intangible crafts and voices. Opening previously inaccessible places can raise awareness and support them for making more visible, and this is marking the pathway to protection. Visibility is a path to protection. I'm closing up with the call to open house communities to organize European Heritage Days events, apply for the European Heritage Days grants, and most importantly, get in touch with the national coordinators of the European Heritage Days, who will be always able to help you to provide ideas how to organize Heritage Days in your places. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Sergei, and thank you very much for keeping the time. I'll just note a very interesting issue that perhaps is worth discussing afterwards, which is the tension between what we think today as heritage and what our the people who are going to follow on our steps are going to think of as heritage in the future. Very much like people who thought of the past as monuments would find it very difficult to think of the way we think of heritage today. If we were hard-pressed, what we would think, what is coming to us is going to look like. And to highlight an example, for example, there might be a tension between the imperative of accessibility, making a particular place accessible to as many people would like to visit it, with the potential impasse of accessibility when the demand for access to a space overwhelms it. And we can think of Venice, for example, as a particular case in point. So the next speaker in our panel today would be Jutta Kastner, who is a policy officer at the European Commission's Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture. So Jutta, you have the floor. Welcome to Athens.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for to speak at this session. Thank you for the invitation to Open House Europe and Open House Athens in particular for organizing this event. It is a pleasure to reflect with you on how a European architecture policy, and actually I'm zooming out a little bit from the previous presentation, from very much focused on cultural heritage to architecture policy. Architecture policy serves the public interest, shaping future tendencies and values in architecture, a subject that could not be more relevant to the transformations of our societies that are currently undergoing. I focus on architecture policy, high quality architecture policy, because if we concentrate on high quality architecture, I think we don't need to worry much about the future heritage. So as policy officer at the European Commission's Director General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture, like you just said, I contribute to shaping EU policy on culture, including on high quality living environments and fostering a shared culture of architecture across Europe. Architecture, as we heard several times during these days, also yesterday and today, is not merely a technical or aesthetic matter. It is a cultural, environmental, and democratic issue. Our built environment shapes how we live and interact, how resilient our communities are, and how we relate our past and the future. Because indeed, architecture is public by nature, as we said. It shapes the way we live, the way we move, interact, and feel every single day. The built environment is the stage of our lives. So when we talk about architecture policy, we are talking about public interest in its most tangible form. In this spirit, back in 2021, the European Commission, actually at the request of member states, including Greece, invited experts nominated from 23 EU member states, including Norway and Switzerland, to reflect on high-quality architecture and built environment for everyone. This expert group issued a landmark report entitled Towards a Shared Culture of Architecture. It called for a fundamental shift from viewing architecture as a niche issue to embracing it as a cross-cutting policy concern with societal relevance. The report made 6 clear and ambitious recommendations. They offer a compass for any country, for any organization, region, or city, aiming to improve its architectural governance and quality of life. So let me briefly outline them. First, promote a culture of quality in the built environment. This means valuing not just functionality or cost efficiency, but long-term quality, contextual sensitivity, and user well-being. Secondly, embed architectural quality in public policies. Architecture should not be an afterthought. It must be integrated into policies for housing, for mobility, climate, and innovation. Thirdly, foster transdisciplinary and participatory approaches. Architectural processes should involve citizens, and when we speak about future heritage, especially young citizens and children even. I heard some children here in the room. Planners, artists, engineers, and policymakers alike. Fourth, support knowledge creation and dissemination, and events like this contribute very much to that. Research, education, and knowledge exchange are key to resilient architectural culture. A fifth recommendation, strengthen international collaboration and peer learning. Europe thrives when we learn from each other, when we build together, not in parallel. Then promote sustainable, inclusive, and beautiful environments. This final point echoes the vision of the new European Bauhaus, that we must build places that are not only green and inclusive, but also beautiful. These recommendations are not abstract. They are deeply concrete, and they speak to shared values, shared European values. Sustainability, democracy above all, solidarity, and cultural diversity. So how have these recommendations translated into action? At the European level, several initiatives taken them forward. First, the European Bauhaus, launched in 2020, has become a unique laboratory for architectural and design-led transformation. It connects the European Green Deal to our everyday spaces, bridging the environmental, social, and aesthetic dimensions of transformation. It supports local initiatives like this one, funds pilot projects, and fosters cross-disciplinary networks of architects, designers, citizens, and policymakers. A European work plan for culture, which is currently running until 2026, has been agreed upon by member states in 2020 and recognizes the importance of Baukultur and quality in the built environment. One of its actions focuses specifically on mainstreaming these principles across cultural and urban policy. These principles are also reaffirmed in the recently published Culture Compass, which provides a strategic orientation for EU cultural policy in the coming years. The Culture Compass explicitly underlines the importance of promoting a shared culture of architecture and design, and of investing in a high-quality living environment for everyone. Thirdly, several EU programs reflect this integrated approach. Creative Europe, the one I'm working for, funds projects such as the European project HouseEurope that use architecture to foster social cohesion, accessibility, and cultural dialogue. Horizon Europe, the research program, supports research into regenerative architecture and heritage reuse. The Interreg program for European territorial cooperation helps regions to learn from each other about sustainable urban planning. So we are also seeing quality-based principles gradually integrated into other areas, such as public procurement, cohesion policy, and green transition strategies, are beginning to reflect the importance of quality-based selection criteria and life cycle thinking in construction. So these developments confirm a shift from fragmentation to integration, a recognition that architectural quality is not a sectoral issue but a systemic concern. Architecture is no longer on the margins. It is increasingly recognized as a driver of systemic change. This also translates in the 40 shortlisted works for the 2026 EU Mies Awards edition, which just published this week. You might have seen in social media and maybe on the website, highlighting today's renewed architectural culture across Europe. The EU Mies Awards, one of the European Union's cultural prizes, recognize how architecture across Europe is embracing innovation, sustainability, and long-term social impact. This year, the jury underlined the growing alignment between architecture, urban planning, and governance to meet the ambitions of the European Green Deal and to shape resilient, high-quality environments for all. The short list also highlights the importance of public investment, local engagement, and collaborative practices, and we heard several of these examples during these days. The 40 works illustrate how creativity, responsibility, and contextual sensitivity continue to shape Europe's architectural culture today. The same principle is also reflected in the recent architectural projects that have been awarded the 2025 EU Mies Awards Young Talent, which celebrates innovative projects by recently graduated architects, urban planners, and landscape architects. Brave New Axis by Spiridon Loukidis, Marcos Sakelion, and Yorgos Thalathinos from the School of Architecture, National Technical University of Athens, and I think they're all the three here in the room if you want to have a conversation with them afterwards, reinterprets Athens' historical urban grid to foster inclusivity, mobility, and continuity. The project demonstrates a careful and focused attention to specific urban conditions, such as underused voids, available buildings, or obsolete infrastructures, proposing intelligent and respectful strategies for their reactivation. Here you see the plans. So now zooming back to policy, what happens at national and local level we are also interested in. Many member states have responded with tangible policy changes. Just a few examples, Germany has adopted federal guidelines for Baukultur in 2025, marking a significant milestone in shaping policy for the built environment. France launched a national strategy for architecture with a strong focus on education, public awareness, and environmental tradition. Denmark's updated policy encourages climate responsible design and inclusive housing. A common feature across all these examples is the growing emphasis on participatory processes, interdisciplinary design, and design quality in public procurement. These developments are reflected in the updated study published by the Architect Council of Europe, which is also supported by Creative Europe, which maps recent developments in architectural policy across Europe. And you see the landscape, the map is nearly all green, so means these are all policies adopted at national level. Moreover, member states, regions, and cities are increasingly exchanging experience through peer learning, which in 2024 we supported at European level through an initiative called Living Spaces, organized in cooperation with Eurocities and Architect Council of Europe. One of the 12 cities peer learning visits carried out as part of this initiative brought us to the city of Oulu, this year's European Capital of Culture, around the topic of culture taking over post-industrial building. The Topila silo is one of the remaining buildings of the Topila cellulose factory, designed by Alvar and Aino Alto in 1931. The silo was left empty and abandoned after the factory closed in 1980s. While most of the factory buildings were repurposed, Alto silo remained untouched. It is now being repurposed and will be a lighthouse project and future legacy of the year. Events like this are ideal platforms to foster shared learning. Still, there are a few challenges we must face together. First, architecture must be embedded more strongly in other public policies. Secondly, we must ensure that quality-based procurement becomes the norm. Third, we need more support for architectural education and public awareness, starting from a very early stage onwards. And finally, more diversity and accessibility in the profession itself. A shared culture must also be an inclusive culture. We have the tools and the knowledge. What we need now is a political will, investment, and the continued culture of collaboration. Let me conclude with a few simple but powerful ideas. Architecture is a public good. We build not only for ourselves, but for future generations. We build future heritage. Policies that value quality in the built environment are an expression of care for our climate, for our societies, and for our democracy. The report towards a shared culture of architecture set out the vision. The European built environment and architecture of tomorrow should be of high quality and to the benefit of everyone. Today we are seeing that the vision is taking root, but continued action is needed. We must continue translating principles into practice, recommendations into policies, and policies into places where people can thrive. With the support of all of you, architects, clients, decision makers, policy makers, investors, we can continue turning principles into practice, recommendations into policies, and policies into places where people can thrive now and in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jutta, for raising some important points. And again, I'm going to signpost a couple of thoughts I had during your talk for the discussion. I'm a political scientist, and very often when we study policies, we find that they produce unintended effects. Even the best thought out policies, the best intentioned policies may produce unintended effects, and it's very difficult to correct them once they happen, but we don't tend to give as much attention to them afterwards. We move to the next policy. So that is one question that I like to ask afterwards, and I'll provide a few examples. One of the things that I find as an Athenian is very often the imperative, for example, for energy efficiency has a detrimental effect on heritage by, for example, leading people to destroy their apartment buildings that have been built in the 1950s and 60s, which are not insulated but have other very interesting characteristics. And trying to find a solution is not always easy or perhaps even possible. Very much like the question of accessibility and democracy, and maximizing access for the present and the utility of living people today, that might be often a challenge for the utility of the people who are coming afterwards. And so that, I think, is a great, a very important philosophical, but also policy challenge. So the next speaker is going to be Jonas Janke, who is an architect and co-founder of Studio B+. And he's part of the initiators team of the HouseEurope campaign. And so we're very much looking forward to your presentation. Thank you for being here.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak here in the name of B+ and HouseEurope. Also, many thanks for the kind introduction, Statis. The title of the lecture or the presentation is HouseEurope, Take Part, P-A-R-T. The derivation of these four letters I will explain more in detail during the presentation. while the transmission from our Mac to the Windows Mac, the text font was changed, but I think it doesn't matter. I have a lot to say in only 10 to 15 minutes time, so let's get started. I would like to use this short presentation to explain somehow how an architectural practice from Berlin established a non-profit policy lab and then is running a European citizen initiative which is called HouseEurope in order to become part of a lawmaking process. We, that is Arno Brandelhuber, Olaf Grawat, Roberta Jurcic and myself, we are B+, a collaborative architecture practice. We are often regarded as an unconventional and in a positive sense somehow unusual architectural practice. This is due to the fact that we are somehow on a position of an antithesis of the traditional architecture practice. One reason is that we do not view architecture as the solely creation of superficial objects where we want to create beauty. This is rather uninteresting to us. We are more seeing every project as a build argument for something, so every building should communicate a message or a call for action. This is also why we generally prefer to see architecture as a systemic interaction, which also is the reason why we are very much interested in legislation. Also, unlike many other architectural practices, we do see legislation not as a necessary evil that prevents the architects to do the really truly great architecture. We see it rather as an active design tool rather than an obstacle. So important for our practice is also, our practice is mostly focusing exclusively on adaptive reuse projects. And this is due to a simple quote or amazing quote by Sabine Oberhuber, economist and circularity expert from the Netherlands. Architecture is always a temporary answer to a temporary need and temporary values. This leads to the fact, and we have to recognize the fact, that we have to constantly deal with buildings and typologies that became obsolete. Buildings that are no longer relevant, buildings that are underused or even unused, and then in addition, often seen as unaesthetic and even ugly. But this is where our practice, as one of many practices, is coming in, and we are seeing a great potential in exactly these buildings. And to emphasize this, I want to show one self-initiated project of us very quickly. It's called San Gimignano Lichtenberg, or the B+ prototyping workshop, because it's the place from where we work. It used to be a GDR coal and graphite product factory in the former East Territory. It was closed down after the fall of the wall. The metal and steel parts of the former factory were dismantled, and what remained more or less like the spines of the former factory were a staircase tower and a storage facility. I'm also showing a silo. And the transformation or the idea was that this tower with the step became the B+ prototyping workshop. And in order to somehow get this project financed, it all started with an invention of a narrative. Because in the eyes of the real estate developers and in the eyes of financial institutions, these two towers were just useless ruins about to decay. So we had to come up with a trick to somehow change the perspective on these towers. And we were borrowing the name of a very beautiful tower-rest city in Tuscany. And we were calling the space then, the Tuscany city is called, by the way, San Gimignano. So we were also calling our place San Gimignano Lichtenberg. And by that we were able to convince the banks to give us a loan. The project now looks more or less like San Gimignano, no, because of its beautiful towers. We tried to transform this former storage facility with the minimal invasive interventions as possible, so it was insulated from the inside. This is our ground floor workshop. This is our first story on 31 meters 83, which is becoming the digital preparation, and let's call it also the office. Also just insulated from the inside, a heating was implemented, some 2 stairways was done, and that was basically everything we did in order to reuse this former storage facility into the B+ prototyping workshop. This is how it looks more or less today in an axometric view. And while working on a project like this, like San Gimignano and other architectural adaptive reuse projects, we constantly discovering the dynamics around the question if a building should be kept or demolished. We have to recognize as architects that we are a part of the problem because the building sector is contributing 38% of the global CO2 emissions, but we can also be a solution. Because we need a fundamental change in the way how we practice architecture and how we build. And we were looking for the biggest lever, what can result in a big change. And apparently an ECI, a European Citizen Initiative, seems to be a lever. So we started to do a European Citizen Initiative to make renovation, transformation and adaptation easier, simpler and faster. In simple words, to boost renovation. And to move from this current mindset where new is always better, which means the demolition of buildings and the construction of new ones. So, which is currently somehow the norm. But shouldn't we value the existing and make renovation the new norm? Now I'm coming to major actions that we advocate for. So first is the preservation, to reuse and don't demolish. Let's value the gray energy that is already embedded in every existing building. Let's save valuable resources for material that would be then used if there would be a new building or new construction. And let's maintain the social and cultural values, which are intangible values embedded in every building, a sense of belonging, memories and history. Adaptation, let's adapt and don't abandon. Let's use and find new narratives for underused, unused and abandoned structures. Renovation, build for the future. That means renovate, repair and take care of existing buildings. Also by doing this, we can reduce waste and CO2 emissions. Transformation means a shift in value. That means let's find a new narrative for values. To understand how the current logic is coming from, we need to also recognize one important fact. Real estate is the most valuable asset in the whole world, 4 times more than all stocks and gold combined. So the real estate market is interested in creating profit. Profit means, in the current logic, new buildings, because in the current system and in the current legislation, the old can never compete with the new. In the logic of the real estate speculators and real estate market, every building is up for demolition, which is not heritage protected. That means maybe your house or your family's house or your friend's house, which is not heritage protected, can be demolished anytime tomorrow and be replaced by anything else, which is mostly after the new construction, not the home of the former inhabitants. So the current logic of profit is sales price plus the demolition price plus the costs for the new construction divided by the square meter future space equals in profit, which means we are having one building, we are demolishing one building, we're building a new one, in the end we're having one. I would maybe challenge this question and propose a new logic of profit. Let's value the existing, let's keep the memories and all these intangible qualities and also the gray energy. Let's put in some transformation and adaptation, and maybe also addition or extension costs, divided then by the future square meters, which could equal up in a new sense of value, of profit in a new value system. And it could be easily done by the calculation. We have an existing building, and maybe we invest 0.5, and in the end we have 1.5. That means by the investment of 0.5, we gain or we have the outcome of 1.5. Sounds simple, but think about it. So what's also interesting thought model, and some very much respected dear colleagues of us from France, Lacaton Vassal, are already establishing themselves with having a different perspective on existing building is, they ask, what if every building is considered as heritage? Not because of an architectural style or a famous person that used to live in it, maybe just simply because of valuing the social, ecological values in a building. And I would like to hand over virtually the word to one of the campaign leaders, Olaf Gravert. This video was more or less exactly taken 1 year ago, so have a look.
Only if it's a true alternative that one can choose, people will follow it. We are HouseEurope. We are a European initiative that tries to come up with new legislation to make renovation easier, cheaper and faster, and therefore more social and also ecological. So our goal is to propose EU laws and bring them to a public vote in a European citizens' initiative. So we need to collect 1 million signatures in 1 year so that citizens can actually help us push these legal proposals into the European Parliament. So the goal is really to make renovation and transformation of buildings the new norm, and therefore create an incentive for people to follow it, just to make the renovation of buildings more attractive than the demolition and new construction, which our current system does. So currently it's more attractive to demolish and build new because it's considered easier, cheaper and faster. We need the support of all Europeans. We need to collect 1 million signatures across at least 7 countries. So the relation to Nature of Hope, to the show, to the exhibition and to also the location is not only the topic that we want to transform existing buildings, save energy, save CO2, save the stories that are in the buildings, but it's also a tool of direct democracy, and we want to make people realize that they actually have a say in how the system is shaped. They are just not yet doing it. So we hope that people will support our initiative, and they can do it very actively. Go to our website, sign up for the newsletter, stay informed, and then in 2025 help us collect 1 million signatures.
As we all recognize, we are already in 2025. The voting period is more or less over. We have 21 days left. But in order to convince you even more, I brought one more video. This is also 1 minute long. It's the trailer that we did for HouseEurope, and afterwards we quickly speak again, and then I'm also done.
Today, speculation has taken over, ruling the global real estate market, ruining cities, commodities and communities, resigning people to suffer in search for a home. But speculation is more than a social issue, it is an ecological one, leaving spaces empty and unused, leading buildings to ruin and decay, letting future generations panic and pay. This story is about us, the 99% that don't look at the earth from above, but through our neighbor's window. If you realize that today, this can be here tomorrow. HouseEurope. This is where I live, where space is not a commodity, where policies changed our perspective, where social and ecological belong together. Imagine that energy and value are being preserved, that empty spaces are being adapted, that existing buildings are being renovated, that exploitative structures are being transformed. Because one thing we must never forget, we all need a space to live. Do you remember? Join the movement and save space from speculation. Take part in HouseEurope.
So together with the team of HouseEurope, 3 legal proposals were developed. I will not talk about this in detail, maybe we can do it during the discussion. But as I said, 21 days left. There are a lot of signatures missing, but it's a way to somehow shape future tendencies and the values of architecture. And this is exactly the topic of this panel theme. Thank you very much. And here's a QR code that leads you immediately to the voting or signing page of the ECI. Thanks.
Thank you, Jonas. I'll ask you during the discussion more information. I would like to hear about the content of those proposals. One of the big challenges, of course, is that thinking again as a social scientist, if it were more efficient to preserve and renovate, why don't we see much more? And the question, of course, is how can we make the cost and the speed of providing housing in the midst of a very important housing crisis more effective perhaps through this channel? What is missing? Is it possible? And what is the narrative, the San Gimignano narrative, so to speak, in order to convince people that this is the way to go? And we're moving to the final speaker for this panel, and this is Matevž Čelik. Sorry for the pronunciation. Architect, writer, cultural strategist, and the head of the European architecture platform LINA. And as I understand it, Matevž will talk to us about LINA and some of the projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. The pronunciation was perfect. Thank you for the invitation to Athens, to this very interesting conference with a very relevant topic, and to be able to connect with all of you around these issues that are very important for LINA as a platform. So LINA is an acronym that stands for Learning, Interacting and Networking in Architecture. It's a European cultural platform, a European architectural platform co-founded by the European Commission through Creative Europe program and partly by the Ministry of Culture in Slovenia. It's coordinated by the Faculty of Architecture at the University in Ljubljana. And we have 33 member institutions because we are a platform that connects emerging professionals in architecture with architectural organizations of different profiles around Europe. These 33 institutions are architecture museums, architecture festivals, biennials, triennials, publishers, galleries, promoters of architecture. And we open a call for emerging talents every year. Last time we received 400 applications, and then we select 25 Spotlight LINA fellows that work on common projects with our institutions and present them at their public events. Currently, we have a call opened if you are an architectural organization or institution, you can apply to become a part of our community. At the end of March, we will select one new LINA member. So my presentation will be about emerging architects. I will be advocating their work, and maybe I will be repeating many things that we have already heard in your presentations yesterday and today, but I think it's important that we find this common ground around these very important issues. This was our final last gathering in Pristina in October last year. But what can we learn from emerging architects? We live in an age of paradoxes, as we have heard many times today. And talking about open houses in Europe, access to diverse spaces geographically, physically, economically, but also politically, today has never been more widespread than before. Yet it seems that broader society's understanding of architecture and of importance of space as one of the key resources for the survival of the humanity and the planet is at its lowest level. So when it comes to future heritage and the discussions that we have had here already and the presentations, it's obvious that we are struggling to shift the focus in heritage preservation from the selective protection of specific objects, of a limited number of objects, historically significant monuments. So to make this shift to the ecological imperative of preserving, adapting, and reusing as many existing buildings as possible. And this is why I think open house festivals are more than just an open house days. I think I really see your festivals as really important festivals through which we can reach and have impact with raising awareness and democratizing to work in architecture. LINA fellows are emerging architectural practices from all over Europe. They are just starting their careers and they are still developing their own way of practicing architecture. They typically initiate a lot of projects on their own and they experiment in projects and they test things. They test design processes as well as presentation formats. And they do this while considering the real life. So they work in real contexts of social crisis, of environmental breakdown, of economic inequalities, and efforts to achieve a more just future for everyone. We can learn a lot from emerging generation. Particularly, we can learn how to practice architecture in a different way, not necessarily to construct new things, but also how to make projects with limited resources and how to take initiative in a variety of challenging situations. The projects of our fellows reveal an important insight about the future heritage that we are discussing here today. The future heritage is not necessarily created in central locations, in comfortable conditions, in orderly environments, but it's very often created in very challenging situations and on the margins. And in case to understand how to work differently, we have to work with people, not for the people. To truly understand architecture, we need to understand the processes that shape every project and every building. This means understanding also who makes decisions, what kind of decisions they make, how these decisions affect the quality of the built environment. We must also learn from past mistakes and poor compromises that were made. Transparency about creating architecture, about doing projects is essential cultural value today. So there's a great potential in what the festivals and other cultural actions are doing to educate audiences and visitors about all of this. Not just about the final appearances of architecture, but also about these processes and decisions and the things that happen behind the stage. From the production of architecture and the buildings that we have constructed, we know that ideas, that processes, responsibility are key to the physical appearance of the buildings today. And therefore, we have to understand that heritage is not just an object or structure. It's design, but it's everything that's embedded in the walls. It encompasses all the processes that shape buildings and all the daily rituals and use and practices that develop around them. contemporary concepts of cultural heritage protection are, as we heard, based in the idea that heritage is a living system of use, of management, of adaptation to modern needs. It's not just preserved visual or symbolic form of history. So therefore, it's really necessary to begin also analyzing and understanding and highlighting the everyday use of buildings in a more systematic way, including temporary uses of buildings. Because this will help us to understand the underlying systems, and then we can start changing also the way of how we build our environment and to preserve more buildings. It's also important to understand that the heritage of the future has no authors. There are no individuals behind, but it's a result of collaborative processes that involves not only architects, but also other disciplines, users, neighbors, policymakers, public servants, construction workers at the end. And collaborative work should not be seen as a problem, but it has to be seen as an advantage. And in this regard, it's important to have these discussions together. The most local projects initiated and implemented by emerging architects address Europe's real problems and challenges. Because they are locally based and because they are built in and realized in real conditions, they have this value. It's important that we as a cultural platform and other cultural platforms build collaborations and European networks that highlight these local stories and truth. And if we want to protect and expand our understanding of architectural heritage, young people must play a really leading role in decision-making processes, not just as participants. Rather than seeing them as next generation, we have to understand that they are already here and that their voice must be significant and not just present. Future heritage will not only be shaped by a single discipline or an institution, but it will be shaped by collaboration between different communities, users, authorities, and us as promoters and cultural workers. And it will require attentive listening to different voices, to shared responsibility, to openness, to dialogue, and mutual support. And only through collaboration, trust, and continuous learning, it will be possible to make changes. It's important to rethink the criteria of success that is rooted in the society today. What if quality is more important than numbers? We should focus on supporting projects and activities that foster a deeper understanding of the built environment, leading to more considered and responsible interventions. So rather than prioritizing visitor numbers or long-term, we should think about long-term impact and invest more into processes, research, experimentation, and local collaboration. And let me finish with two examples that are very different. One is Pišeca Castle in Slovenia, a cultural monument that was renovated already back in 2006. And it illustrates how heritage depends not only on physical renovation, but rather on careful planning of its use. Despite of its completion and renovation, it remains closed up to these days due to inadequate planning. I have been working closely in the latest years with the local community to find an institution that would occupy the castle and open it to the public. And I believe that after almost 20 years, we will manage to do so in 2026. And another example, which I find very important and is recent, are the student-led protests that happened in Belgrade in the last year, and they demonstrate how future heritage is also shaped through civic responsibility and collective action. And here protesters, as you know, succeeded to protect Generalstab, which is a key work by Nikola Dobrović from 1957, which was damaged during NATO bombings in 1991, and it was planned to be demolished by speculation of Jared Kushner. And their action prevented it to happen, affirming that heritage will endure only when society actively defends it. So let me finish by saying that future heritage is not only what we preserve for future generations, but it's rather also how we practice and how we use things now for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And since we kept more or less our time limits, we have, I would say, about 45 minutes until 2:30 to have a discussion. So please come over. There are many connections between the different approaches. And so I would like to start by asking all of you to reflect on the following issue, which is very close to my heart and many of my compatriots' hearts. There is a very big problem in Greece and a very big discussion about the future of tourism, especially places like the Cycladic Islands are very much in demand globally. And the tendency right now is to build as much as possible on those islands, both because there is a lot of demand from international visitors. More and more people want to take advantage of the present heritage that those places represent, but also very often the local communities as well, which see in the development of those islands an opportunity to improve their lives. And so if we go by the principles of inclusivity and democracy, we are being more inclusive by allowing more and more people to take advantage of those places, and we're being more democratic if we listen to the demands of the local population. That seems to contradict the list of desiderata that you promote. But at the same time, it looks like if we follow that course of action, we are going to destroy the future heritage or the heritage that those places represent for future generations. So how do we solve this problem from your perspective? The perspective of public policy, the perspective of promoting heritage, or the perspective of architecture or innovation or building? Your thoughts on that as a point of entry. And you have microphones in front of you, so you can take them. And perhaps we can start with Sergei.
Yeah, it's not an easy question. I can only address it from the European Heritage Days perspective, if I may. I wanted to cite Cycladic Islands Heritage Days events in my presentation, but I cut it for the timekeeping sake. What they do, European Heritage Days, is very much about grassroots initiative, about community, and you can use them as an opportunity for the community to understand what they value as a heritage, and also to showcase what is traditional practices, traditional crafts, traditional materials used in this particular place for generations, for years. It's an opportunity to showcase masters who still practice that. And for that, if you show it, because in Cycladic Islands, a lot of kids involved in these initiatives, if you show it to the younger generation, they start to value more the environment they are in, and probably they could address this issue of development in the future.
Let me push back on that, and perhaps it's an opportunity for the others to come in. One of the very big issues we have is the success sometimes of this kind of cultural heritage. And I'll give you an example. In some islands, the traditional dance festivals during the summer have been incredibly successful because people have rediscovered what their participation means. But this has created a new problem, which is that more and more people want to take part in those festivals, which essentially destroys them. And nobody has a clear solution to that problem. So, Jonas.
So I think sometimes for the local people, they sometimes seem to think about the whole situation in a very short-term thing, because they say, maybe there are tourists coming, and then I will have a own shop, and then I will have my small business, etc. But we know from a lot of examples that how it will end up. So actually these people should be also aware about that there is a certain limit then, and then we have a trash problem or environmental problem. And I think one possible solution, I just had like 2 minutes to think about it, but one possible solution could be to think about how is this whole thing set up. Because in the usual cases it's like that. There are big like hotel firms, etc., or big, let's say, foreign investors that decided, I want to place a hotel there, I want to place a kind of whatever venue there, and then the profit is generated, and maybe then the local people are hired in these kind of facilities. But I think it needs to be, this very top-down approach, no? I think then it comes really to one of the things that also Jutta promoted, it's these participatory processes and integrating the kind of locals in order to develop together with them a system until a certain capacity, how it works. And then it also needs to be defined, this is the limit. It requires some kind of master plan, I guess. This is the limit we can afford, let's say, or the capacity of this island is 5 hotels, 2 this, 2 that, and then it's saturated because otherwise it's flipping back and will backlash at one point. So I think it's a participatory negotiation process that could lead to a positive outcome.
So before I move to Jutta, which I'm sure would like to add to that, there is at present a process of planning and zoning going on in many sensitive places. One of the big difficulties is very often local people are pushing for more development. And from a social science perspective, this is a well-known problem. It's called the tragedy of commons. It's called the collective action problem, in which essentially the short-term benefit essentially trumps the long-term benefit. People want to make money now as opposed to think about a future in which they don't care very much about. And it's very difficult to cross that
Maybe this is
bridge.
the perfect term then to talk about future heritage, because it's also the future heritage to maintain a certain, let's say, system. And the people need to be aware, if we are too greedy and want to do this, etc., and want more and more and more, this is not working out. So it's about creating an awareness. It's creating about communicating the consequences, because sometimes maybe they are not aware about the consequences. So I think,
Jutta, any ideas?
Yeah.
There is.
Okay, take this. Yeah, I have an idea which, very much impacts our work, or very much comes from our work. Actually, you mentioned top-down, bottom-up approach. And I think this is very much needed for all strategic decisions. You need somebody top-down who holds a caring hand for processes, who issues regulations. You are asking for regulations following HouseEurope. And you need a bottom-up, you need to take people with you. And I think the larger this ecosystem is in between, the more, and communication is very, very important, awareness raising, because obviously, we heard Greece had a crisis, now slowly recovering. Tourism is one of a huge economic element in this. And I can imagine that, I mean, citizens are happy to be part of it and also invest in it and get something out of it, of the investment. But you need, I think, this is, as I said, very much the policy hand. You need the caring hands. You need visionaries. You need those people who are able to communicate to the citizens, then who finally give the votes again. I'm talking about politicians, government, to say, yes, but how can we do it? You know, how can we? Or could we, rather than having, I don't know, one season for the festival, split it over several moments in the year to channel the tourism? When I heard your questions, I had to think very much about the city of Barcelona, taking a little bit away in another country, in the context of, you know, where tourism is also, we discussed last evening, tourism is a high economic factor with a detriment. I mean, you had short-term rental real estate development very much developing in Barcelona, with the result that the normal citizens are pushed out of the city and cannot afford living there anymore. And I heard that the mayor of Barcelona took a strict decision and said, I think until 2030, or no more licenses for Airbnb. This is harsh. This is harsh for those who might have invested in places to be part of this ecosystem of tourism, and they will no longer, or I'm not fully aware how it will be implemented, but it's a hard decision by policy for the benefit of people. And this is, I think, communication is there super, super important, and strategic communication. I mean, exactly saying to the citizens, explaining, and especially to young people, and listening to young people as well. I don't know how many young people are involved in these voices that want more development for tourism. How many are there? And I think this is very important, you know, to get the people on board.
Matevž, any thoughts?
No, I think that there has been not much discussion about tourism, which obviously is an industry that is eating itself. It is eating its own resources. And of course, it's different when it happens in big cities or when it happens on Greek islands, in the hills of Slovenia. But at the end, it's about how to make visitors who come not just temporarily use and abuse the resources that are there, but how to become more a part of
Let me ask the question in a more provocative way, because you mentioned very much inclusivity. Is the solution, for example, to the future of Venice as a future heritage place, is it to say we have to be less inclusive?
I think we will have to admit that there has to be more control and more planning if we want to find a solution. And I think we will have to openly start talking about it and also practicing it at the end.
Okay, yeah. Sergei.
There is a need for a holistic approach. We cannot find a magic bullet, one solution which kind of solves all the problems. And such initiatives as open house, heritage days, cultural roots, European heritage label sites, they all try to teach one thing. We need to value what we have and pass to next generations. And there are various ways to do it. And increasing, for example, accessibility is not necessarily detrimental to good development. If you increase accessibility to other sites, not focusing touristic paths to well-known sites, but also spreading it along the country, it's one way to deal with it, just one way.
Yeah.
But also raising kids who are aware that development is necessary, but you should need to take care and think about longer terms.
I'll give you an example because I think it's very relevant. I lived in Florence about 20 years ago, and I remember at the time Florence was mobbed during specific months, and only the center around the Duomo was crowded. And so the idea was, let's spread tourism across seasons and across the city. And right now, there is no season, the city is crowded throughout the year, and the entire city, including the other side of the river, which used to be much less crowded, is also crowded, and locals have been pushed out of that as well. So it seems that the solution of spreading very often just multiplies the problem, very much like building more highways, increases the number of cars and therefore traffic.
What we notice through the Heritage Days communities recently, there is increasing interest in local heritage, in valorization of, say, little church in my village. And if you channel interest to local through various initiatives, that might decrease the burden for the known sites. And I don't want to mention IT solutions to virtual tours and everything. It could be also part of the Save in Florence or...
Well, that is a good segue to my next question, which is the question of heritage seems to be very much connected to the physical, to the built environment around us, what we experience directly. One of the most important developments, obviously, is now the development of artificial intelligence, which, as a possible effect, is to disconnect us from this physical environment. And we are already seeing some of the implications of that. So what thoughts do you have and how the concept of heritage may interact or speak to the creation and the rise of new technologies that are less and less physical? Jonas?
Just one thought. I think there's sometimes these, let's call it maybe a misunderstanding or a fight of the architects against the Heritage Protection Office or authority, right? Let's put up the stereotypical kind of opinions. For instance, the architect wants to be more progressive and change the building. The Heritage Protection Authority then said, no, the windows exactly need to be like that. And then suddenly the result is nothing happens, and that's a pity. So I could imagine that maybe this kind of digital world and could potentially be one solution or one argument to make this fight a little bit easier, because in the digital realm now there's also this trend of the digital copies of environments, no? So we can preserve a status quo, but maybe in the digital world, which means you can discover a whole district or a whole building somehow digitally, and you can still sense the craftsmanship, you can still sense how the original windows will be, but you can be maybe a little bit more, can give a little bit more freedom in the real world, that it can be adapted or more easily adapted or more freely adapted, that the building can be with minimal invasive or easier be reused and brought back into the...
What if someone told you that, well, with the technology we have, we can do a 3D scanning of the existing structure, and then using augmented reality and virtual reality, we can recreate the experience of actually experiencing this building, and therefore let's tear it down, because we don't need to preserve it since it has been preserved digitally. How do you respond to that?
This is one extreme, and there I have a very clear opinion. I would dare to say never demolish and always try to transform, because in every stone that is somewhere, there is embedded energy of a person that was producing this stone or brick, in the energy that was consumption when a person was taking the brick and putting it on the other brick. And there are, of course, these intangible values that someone feels very connected to this brick because it was the brick where she kissed her first boyfriend or whatever. So we still need to be aware about the kind of value of each stone or element in the real world. So I would strongly advocate for not tearing it down.
And how would you respond to someone who would describe this kind of attitude as romantic conservatism? Would you say you are a romantic conservative?
No. No, this is why I try to draw up the first idea to get rid of a certain nostalgia that we keep exactly an image of a building, and says no, it can be kept maybe in a virtual copy, but therefore we can make bigger windows that the rooms behind them get enough light to put apartments there, and then the building gets a new layer, a second life or a 30th life, and is brought back into use. Because in our understanding, or in my understanding, a monument or a heritage protected building that is not in use is the worst building somehow. It should be brought back into use.
What do you think about that? And especially the idea of the changing nature of what we call preservation and reuse. We heard in the previous panel about buildings. Traditionally, the idea was to bring a building back to how we thought it looked like, which is never exactly the way it looked like or was used. And then there was a sort of a more modernist perspective. Let's reuse it in a way that is convenient to us today, and we have this opening, light comes in. Then there is a third step, which seems to be, let's preserve all the various layers that we discover, not try to make the place new, but also display the elements of these palimpsests, right, of the different kinds of layers of history that have gone through it, which I think is exemplified in projects like the Neues Museum in Berlin, for example, in which the damage of war is not repaired, but is preserved for people to understand the past that has affected the building. So what do you think is the direction that this is going? How are we going to renovate or preserve, say, 20 years from now?
I think in that sense, there's not been a big difference. Preservation always is technical measures, and then there are different approaches how to preserve a building.
For example, to give you an example, going to the panel before, the monastery that had this new kind of cover, if a project like that was proposed in Greece, it would generate a public outcry because people are not used to this kind of mix. Do you think that is the direction of things, or?
It did create a public outcry in Slovenia as well, but I think every innovative project does create a public outcry. And there is no one single approach to preserve heritage, but I think that's not the discussion we should have today. I think the discussion how to move the understanding of preservation heritage from this traditional perspective of preserving single important buildings to this more ecological perspective, to trying to preserve every building. I think we should find ways how to move in these directions. On one hand, how to maybe loosen some restrictions, as Jonas said, for preserving some buildings that should not be just preserved as images and objects, but really through use and practice. And on the other hand, how to make people understand that preserving every building, even without really important historical use, is important nowadays.
Well, because we never know how future generations may come to see them. One of the most interesting developments, I would say, in Athens, partly thanks to Open House Athens in the last 10-15 years, is the appreciation of the buildings that were built in the 1950s and 60s, the apartment buildings that make up Athens today, which until recently were viewed in a very negative light, are now being appreciated again. This is not something that's easy to recognize when you see them going up. I have a question for Jonas. You mentioned the legislation that will make renovation easier.
Yeah.
So if you can give us a concise description of those measures.
Maybe first a side note on the question before. So first of all, I really liked both and all projects of the two Slovenian architects that presented the projects, and I think this is of course a great way how to deal with these existing structures. But I think in general at the moment it's like if there's a building protected, it's always this gigantic moment of celebration. Yeah, we are protecting this church. I think in the future maybe it becomes way more normal to say, yeah, we protected this building, we added a roof, we added a door, that's fine. So maybe it will be just, it needs to get more normal. So then, this is how I then would guess it will develop, that it's becoming from an exception that needs to be celebrated to a kind of norm, where suddenly when you see it and it's not, when you see it, that it becomes like, this is the obvious way how to do it. And okay, now coming to the, or maybe Jutta wanted to add also to the...
Yes.
I don't know.
Okay, we leave this. Thank you. I wanted to add something on the previous question because I think this is very relevant. Maybe your question was very much targeted on using AI or digital technologies to kind of replace the physical tourism to cultural heritage sites. That could be an option for also those who are not mobile, who cannot, or for other reason cannot afford a physical visit or a trip to a certain place. But, and this is very much your topic, actually, and I pick it up a little bit, or you want to maybe say it from our conversation we had before meeting here. I think these tools are very important and relevant when it comes to preservation also of, for whatever reason, for research of cultural heritage we have today, because there are climate conditions that destroy cultural heritage, hazards. We don't even want to go that far to think of war in Europe that destroys our cultural habitat, but we have one country where that happened. Personally, I visited once an exhibition. It was about the cultural heritage of Syria, which does not exist anymore. I mean, from Damascus, it does not exist anymore, and I was amazed to see what was there. And this can, of course, be now used as, these images can now be used as a basis for research. If then it's rebuilt in exactly the same language and structures and ways, that's another discussion. But at least there is a historic knowledge about this and data about this. So that's why I think I'm very much a friend, and there is also this platform Europeana, which makes accessible cultural heritage to images to citizens, I mean, also for awareness and education purposes. So I stop there now for the regulations.
The legal proposals. So, for instance, one idea was, first of all, how to start to approach, how to come up with a new legislation or come up with new, or with proposals, and it was checking what is already existing in the European realm, where renovation is let's say incentivized compared to demolition. And one example was, for instance, Italy. So in Italy, you pay 10% tax on a worker that is working on a renovation project, but you pay 20% tax on a person that is working on a new construction. And I think this is an immediate kind of incentive to rather transform your house and renovate it instead of demolishing it and building it new. So we said, there could be a tax incentive somehow. This was one legal proposal. This is a very kind of economical thing. Then the other thing, also somehow related to an economical fact, is that apparently, if you want to get a loan for architectural project, the banks also need to secure their loans that they are giving. And apparently the reinsurance of their loans is 3 times higher for renovation and renovation projects than for new projects due to the risk. It's all about risk evaluation. Mm-hmm. And we would ask for a kind of equal risk evaluation, because we think also that the risk in new construction also went up nowadays. It's about supply chain problems, it's about material shortage. So we would rather ask for a transparent and equal risk evaluation of these, of let's say new construction versus renovation. Third thing is simply learning a little bit from the Scandinavian environment there, but it's also spreading everywhere. You have these not material passports, but these CO2 certificates for new buildings. When they are built, You always have to say this building contains so much CO2 while being built and will consume so much CO2 while just doing the running process.
Yeah.
Yes, but there's no certificate for existing buildings. So just imagine the silo that Jutta was showing or the tower that I was showing. Imagine there would be a passport. In this building, there are 35,000 tons of gray energy in the concrete embedded. And if you want to demolish it, dear investor or someone else, you need to pay a equivalent or whatever. Then you think twice if you demolish it, because at the moment you can just demolish it if it's not heritage protected. And this then suddenly adds a value in every existing structure. And I don't care if this is a real calculated number of CO2 that is in the house, or if this is a fictional number that you just somehow calculate by the cubic meters. But then suddenly an existing building becomes a kind of, a value. A measurable value. And
how would you answer to the question, to the objection, say, of someone who would tell you there is a housing crisis, there are people who need housing and don't get it, and by introducing those measures you are making slower and more expensive to house new people? How do you respond to that?
Can I?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
No, because this is very topical, because as you might have followed, when was it? A couple of weeks ago, the European Commission issued the affordable housing strategy. I mean, we must say that the responsibility for it lies very much in the member states, and they also very often remind us of that. However, we needed to react. So there is these two building blocks. You have the ones that are shouting for new buildings, fast new buildings, faster permissions. Who said yesterday you have not yet the permission to renovate the house on the Greek island, or others, I think, mentioned that as well. So faster, quicker, then I get a little bit nervous. And the others, where we opened a conversation also, and I took on board exactly players from the heritage sector, and I said, where are you? I don't hear you. Cultural heritage buildings, they are empty. Very often, they're not used. Why? And there are examples in Europe where cultural heritage buildings are transformed in affordable housing. In student housing, we have in Leuven, we have a very good example. And said, make this heard to your decision makers, because going away exactly from this new buildings, faster buildings, and of course there is a call, but because people want to live somewhere and they want to have affordable places to live, and that's really an issue in Europe. But I think exactly, and then what is also like, when we're thinking about new buildings, I think it's very, very interesting to see with what material. Because there's nothing against new buildings. Okay, we go into the field of new land take and take of brownfield, which is also under discussion, and maybe in some cases it's the only solution, but has after careful evaluation. But the how-to, again, and the cultural heritage sector should manifest itself very strongly in this discussion and say, these are empty spaces and they can be adaptive reuse, there can be rededicated. So I think one does not exclude the other.
Okay, Matevž?
I would agree with that. I haven't read the affordable housing strategy yet, but there is a research that shows that, and we discussed it a little bit yesterday, that the problem of housing in Europe is not about not enough new houses and apartments being built, but it's about empty apartments that are not available on the market. And that's, I think every single country in Europe knows that it needs to do something about it. But
this is a very big problem in Athens, as we discussed. There are many old buildings that are left to crumble.
It usually is property tax. And
yes.
No government wants to do it, because, particularly in the countries where the share of ownership is high, because people consider it as jealousy tax.
I also wanted to more or less go in this direction, but I think there are also solutions. I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure, but I will say this now. But there are, for instance, in the Netherlands, there were kind of like legislations where you said if there's an apartment and you don't rent it out after half a year, there will be also a fine. So I think this was, I think, one mechanism, or it was more or less somehow like that. I'm not sure, as I said. So it was then, it was a simple way how to avoid that buildings or that apartments are just sitting empty and rot, or are just there for speculative purposes.
Okay, so before we close, let me take this few minutes just to ask you an unprompted question. You are in Athens. What comes to mind when you visit Athens in terms of heritage? Beyond that.
I would probably say some strange thing, but I think the life here hasn't changed in thousands of years. People are still eating on the streets night and day, and the Acropolis is still highest rise. There are no skyscrapers around, so it's kind of very natural. And I think,
even though this is a city that is incredibly modern, and for the most has been built up since the 1950s, but still, I find your point very interesting because it still conveys this sense of unchangeability, even though it's so new.
I had a very strange feeling when I was in Acropolis yesterday. When you look down under your feet, you see little stones. And when you look outside, the city looks like these little stones. It's a very strange feeling, like it's all fits together into the landscape also, going down to the sea. So it's very modern, but it was modern at the time when Acropolis was built. Nobody was building such structures at the time. They were bigger buildings, nicer buildings probably, but how people interacted with the structures and with the nature, it was quite modern at the time, and it remains so.
So the idea of the white cube, essentially. Matevž?
No, it's exactly what it comes to my mind is to come here and enjoy heritage, but at the same time all the comfort of the modern life, but also to see the city alive as it lives today. So I think it's completely the opposite. Like our colleagues in Rome are struggling with seeing Rome as modern, but Athens is a modern city that incorporated heritage into life in a very
creative way.
Not just creative, but also common sense, practical way.
I think there are, of course, these let's say, typical and obvious sites that are considered heritage. But I think what stuck with me is somehow also this Athens is not a city, it's cities within a city. And it's also a certain disbalance, let's say, and order and disorder. I think this is exactly what makes the quality and what should not be questioned or erased or whatever. It's exactly the uniqueness of Athens, and therefore I would not start discussions about is this polykatikia too high, or is it just because it's pink or black it's wrong. No, this is just part of the city fabric, and this is the uniqueness of Athens, and therefore I think exactly this is what I would consider heritage in the geographical position where Athens is, the urban fabric, how it's spread and how it's consisting out of the different, as I said, somehow cities within a city. That's what I would call heritage.
Great. And Jutta, you have the final word.
Thank you. Of course, I mean, the strong point here is democracy. I mean, really like where it comes from, where its roots lie. Culture. I mean, Greek culture is very strong. In its history and the way and the paths it follows. That's why we also might call the new Creative Europe program Agora EU. It has a little bit its roots here and what happened in the heart of Athens. I think once in the conversation you also mentioned intangible heritage. I think the Greek culture, like often cultures from Southern Europe, has this strong aspect of caring for each other, caring also for the elderly. Being a bit familiar with the life here and having come to Greece for several years now, I feel also, and you mentioned heart of Athens, the shops are disappearing, these little shops specializing in different kind of craftsmanship. I mean, I observed that as well. Very much to the regret. So, because whenever there was something specific to be done, I couldn't do in Brussels, I bring it here and it's done here. So, this is also a little bit lost. So, exactly, we are very much, our conversations were focused on future heritage in terms of buildings and monuments. But I think when this intangible heritage would disappear, I don't say it disappears, but would disappear, this also would have a strong impact on this tangible heritage, because it voices a care for our culture. Just like you mentioned, I mean, Cycladic islands are calling for new infrastructure. I mean, I was told that in former times the houses in islands were open and you would even host foreigners or travelers. This is intangible heritage for me. I mean, I don't say that I would not easily do this, but I think just in a timeline, I think this is also an aspect that not only Athens faces, and a lot of cities, and especially from southern cultures, where these strong cultural roots.
So I would encourage you to, since you specialize in heritage, to think about the intangible dimensions and also the behavioral dimensions of heritage, the ways in which people behave that shape the environment in which they live and in turn are shaped by it, and incorporate that in future iterations of your very valuable projects. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.